Welcome everyone to the last of our four-part series for January, all about all of the major tools for being a job seeker in the life sciences. We've covered resumes, we've covered LinkedIn, we covered the Seismic platform last week, but today we're going to cover what I think is one of the most exciting but also nerve-wracking parts of the interview process, which is the interview. Exciting because you finally get some face-to-face time to talk with someone at the company you're interested in about the products they're working on, about where they see the company going, and about how they see you fitting into those future plans. But it's also nerve-wracking because it's kind of like public speaking with really high stakes. So today we're going to go through some strategies and tips to help you prepare for the interview and go in with just a little bit more confidence, even if you don't have a whole lot of time to prepare. I'm Erin from Seismic. I'm going to be leading the presentation, and joining me is Beth, also from Seismic. She's going to be monitoring the chat and also joining us at the end for the Q&A portion. Beth, have you been looking at the chat about where is everyone falling with comfort level for interviews?
I see quite a bit of from about 2 to 5. So there are a few 5s, quite a bit of 4s, and quite a bit of 2s.
Okay, so
generally kind of in the middle,
All right, so no one's completely adverse to the idea of going into an interview at this point, but it sounds like we kind of run the gamut between very, very comfortable and still getting comfortable with the idea, which is a good place to be. The good news is, if you make it to an interview, you already know that you're a highly qualified applicant, because only about 2% of applicants end up making it to the interview stage. If you've made it to the interview, you're a good match for the role. They like what they saw on your resume. They liked what they might have heard in the phone screen if you went through a phone screen. Your skills and your experience are a good match for the role. And the interview is just a chance for you to showcase and provide more details for what they already like about you. But it's also your chance to hear a little bit more about the company and interview them back. Find out if it's a job opportunity or if it's a good job opportunity for you. The flow that we're going to go through is going to be how we would lay out the interview process for a typical applicant. I'm going to start with researching the company. What's the minimal information that you should know if you don't get a whole lot of time to prepare? Typically, industry interviews, you're not going to have a whole lot of notice to prepare for an interview. They might send a schedule 24 hours, 48 hours in advance asking you if you're available for the interview. Different if it's not virtual, different if travel is involved. But what minimally do you need to know to go into the interview confident? And then the reviewing stage. What do you need to review about yourself before you start preparing for questions, before you start thinking about how you're going to answer those? And then practice. How do you actually go about formulating the questions, formulating the answers to questions, and practicing your presentation? And then lastly, the inaction. What do you do the day of to make the best impression? Mention an interview is also the chance for you to interview them. And herein is where it's going to lie the difference, as I mentioned, between just an offer and a good offer for you, and finding out which one it is. So you can look for red flags, or you could look for green lights. Red flags are going to be things that you know you don't want in a role. Green lights are going to be your must-haves. The way to do this is to really examine your past experiences, the jobs you've had in the past, the mentors you've worked with, and think about what kind of environments you thrive in and what kind of environments you struggle in. And if there's anything that you never want to do, and if there's something that you need to be doing in a job to find it fulfilling. Once you've narrowed that down, prepare some questions to ask them during the interview that's going to help you figure out if they're a good match for you. They've already reviewed your skills and experience through your resume. They're going to want more details during the interview process. You've already reviewed the job description and a little bit about them. Now you can ask for more details from them to figure out as well if there's mutual interest from you. And we know that over 50% of candidates have said that they lose interest in a job after a bad interview experience. This is actually a good thing. It's not a good thing that they had a bad interview experience, but it's a good thing that they were able to figure out during the interview that they don't actually want this job. Because most professional development organizations will suggest that you try to stay at a role for about 2 years before moving on. And so you don't want to just think of it as a job that you can obtain, but a job that you could see yourself staying at for 2 years. And that's the benchmark that you want to evaluate job opportunities against. Some questions you can ask is, for example, you don't really want to be a manager. You don't find leading a team something that you are inclined to do. Ask them if the role has managerial responsibilities. Maybe it's really important to you how you receive feedback. We all like to receive feedback, especially constructive feedback, differently. So you can ask them, how is the team feedback given in the department? This is also where you can ask for things like beyond salary. How are employees rewarded or recognized for strong performance, if that's something that's important to you? You likely know a little bit about the skills that they're interested in from the job description, but say there's a skill that you're concerned about how much expertise you actually need in it or how big of a role it's going to play in the eventual job. You can ask for more details about how proficient they actually need the person to be, or specifics about the types of skills, if they've only given a very broad generalization of the types of skills that they're looking for. The important thing is just not to ask something that's available readily on the job description. Going along with that, research is going to be very rewarded when it comes to interviewing. We know our hiring managers say that they have passed on candidates in the past who don't have a whole lot of knowledge of the company. They're looking for mutual interest. They're looking for engaged applicants. And one of the ways that they gauge that is by seeing if you have some basic knowledge of the company besides just the name of the organization that you are interviewing with. We know that you might not have a ton of time to do this research. And so you do want to budget maybe an hour at minimum to this. And these are the things that most people will tell you to look for. You want to look up what the products or services of the company is, but also what their mission and values are. This is also going to tell you a lot about how they operate as an organization. You can find most of these things on the company website or LinkedIn, but say they're in stealth mode and they don't really have that public presence. If you're going through a recruiter, you want to ask these questions of them before you actually get face-to-face with the hiring manager or the panel that you're interviewing with. If they tell you who you're interviewing with, look them up on the company website or LinkedIn. See what their research history is, what kind of science background they come from, give you a sense about how much expertise they're going to actually have in what you're doing and what they might need a little bit more hand-holding with as you go through and explain your past experience. If you aren't told who your interviewers are, instead, I would suggest looking at the founders or co-founders or the CEOs of the company, essentially who the senior leadership is. This will again give you the sense of the scientific depth of the company, a little bit about the background and interests of the people that you might be meeting, what you might have in common with them. And give you also a sense of what they value outside of work. And then you want to pull up the job description and re-review the details of the role. This is again making sure that you have a sense of what the role is going to entail when you're going into the interview, making sure that you're not asking questions that are readily available on the job description. And in fact, I would suggest bringing the resume, the job description with you to the interview, not to pull out and reference while you're answering questions, but to have on hand in your portfolio or folder that you're bringing. It's nice to have this if the role they start describing to you doesn't sound like the role that you applied to on paper. It's good to have this to reference as you discuss further the role that maybe you thought you wanted, but maybe is now starting to sound like maybe not what you want. Then after you've researched the company, budget again, at least another minimum hour to reviewing yourself. Pull up the resume that you sent them. This way you know that all the information that they have on you is there. What you haven't provided is stuff that you're going to have to provide more details on. You can also look at what might have caught their eye about your resume and what they're likely to ask you to expand upon. We know that about 75% of questions are about experiences from more than a year ago. They're not just going to be asking you about your most recent experience, especially if it's not your most recent experience that has the most skills and parallel experiences for the current role or similar responsibilities. You want to think about what experiences showcase your best aptitude for the role and be prepared to provide more details for that experience. Like the job description, a lot of people will suggest bringing your resume with you to the interview. Again, not to pull out and reference during the interview, but it always just helps make you look a little bit more prepared if for some reason your interviewer shows up and they left your resume in their office, to be able to say, oh, here's a copy that you can use. It just looks like you really prepared. It makes you look very polished. And if there's something that they start referencing, which is not on your resume, maybe for whatever reason, they thought they were interviewing someone else. They've got a couple interviews that day and they've mixed it up. You have that to reference as well. Now, we all probably have something on our resume that we really hope they won't ask us about. Maybe it was a gap in employment. Maybe it was not a gap in employment, but you left the field for a while and did something else, and now you've come back to the field. Maybe it's having to leave a previous role abruptly. Rather than hoping that they don't ask you about it, assume that they probably will and prepare for it. Because companies like to ask about previous challenges or failures. Those are actually among the top 3 most asked questions in an interview. This is because they want to see how you respond to setbacks and challenges. They want to see what your problem-solving ability is like. They want to see what your resilience is like. So some good tips are reflect on those setbacks. And because positivity is really powerful, you want to try to reframe them as learning experiences. What did you learn from the experience? Or what are you able to demonstrate? Maybe in that gap of employment, you did independent learning to keep up to date with the field or gain a new skill. That's really powerful because it's a learning experience. It showed that you have a good degree of being independently driven to learn and grow. And then the successful outcome is you can then apply that to the new role. You've essentially gained a skill through this challenge that will now allow you to contribute something powerful to your current position. Now we're going to get into the part where you're actually predicting what you might be asked. coming up with some answers and practicing them. And the majority of candidates, over 90%, tell career counselors that this is actually the most critical tool for preparing for an interview, is just vocalizing the answers that they might give and getting very practiced and comfortable with speaking those questions in a less gauntlet of decision-making type environment that an interview can feel like. And practice makes perfect. A good tip that you might have seen as well is to prepare with a friend or prepare with a career counselor. But that's not something that's always going to be available, especially if you're fielding multiple interview requests. So instead, try something like recording yourself through the free version of Zoom, or Google Meet as well has a recording option. Just record yourself answering the questions to your computer screen and then watch your answers back. Suggest recording visually and audio rather than just recording on a phone app of audio, because interviewers are going to be looking at your body language and gauging your openness, gauging your confidence that way, as well as listening to your answers. So you want to be able to watch yourself doing both and judge that. But as for the content of your answers, you want to focus on, are your answers concise? And does your strongest argument, your main point, stand out? For concise, you want to try to keep your answers to most questions limited to what would amount to less than one written paragraph, 3 or 4 sentences. And you want to try to just provide your strongest example or your strongest use of a skill, rather than giving them a list of examples where they might pick up on the one that's the least evidence of your preparedness for the role. So try to keep it to one main point, try to keep it concise, and practice multiple times, because the more times you actually verbalize it, the more times you actually do it, the more familiar it's going to feel, and the more comfortable and therefore confident you're going to feel when you're actually either in person in front of the panel or hiring manager, or virtually. When it comes to actually formulating the answers to questions, you need to do some prediction about what you might get asked. And as we covered in resume, as we covered in LinkedIn, skills are one of the major determinants for qualifications for a STEM role. So you're going to be asked about skills. Predicting which ones you're going to be asked about can actually be pretty simple. You pull up that job description that you referenced and you look at all the skills they're looking for as their must-haves or their minimum requirements for a role. And you want to provide an example for how you utilized each one for a successful outcome in the past. You're probably not applying to roles where you meet 100% of the qualifications. Usually say apply to roles that you meet over half or about 60% of qualifications. For ones where they might ask you about a skill that you don't have, you want to have stories of how you were able to quickly learn a new skill in the past. That's going to be a lot more powerful than just saying, I'm confident that I could learn this skill. Being able to show them evidence of how you did it in the past, and therefore how you're going to be able to do it in the future, is going to be a lot stronger of an argument to make in an interview. But what about the skills that you do have? You might have heard of the STAR method for answering interview questions like this: situation, task, action, result. That's actually a lot for me to remember. And I know if I'm trying to answer a question about skills and I'm going, okay, situation, task, action, result, it can feel a little bit wooden. So I try to look at it a lot simpler. I try to just set it up as a story of, how do you use these skills? What was the major outcome? I say story because humans are really focused on following narratives. We're going to remember details and be able to remember what's being said better for stories than a list of everything that you've done. essentially that how you use these skills combines the situation, task, action into one. It's just, what was the goal? What was the background for how you use these skills? And then what did you actually do? What assay did you design? What tissue were you working on? And with which biochemical assay? And then an outcome. A lot of times we'll suggest using a metric or a really positive outcome that'll close the story off, like a publication, an invited talk, a grant, but it doesn't need to be that conclusive of an outcome. You just want to be able to close your story with something positive. I have an example here. So pretend that you're applying to a role that's looking for next generation sequencing skills, and you're asked, tell me about your experience using next generation sequencing. An answer like this: I use next generation sequencing to investigate transcriptional changes associated with mild cognitive impairment. That's essentially what you've done. That's how you use these skills. That resulted in the discovery of a previously unreported change that my lab will be investigating for therapeutic potential. That's still an outcome. It's a future direction, but it is an outcome. It shows a positive contribution to the lab that you brought about through your actions. And more than that, not only a positive contribution to the lab, but a potential positive contribution to therapeutics. And what is industry except applied science for human or animal health? Transferable skills are also something that they're going to be looking for, as well as values. So, and a lot of these will come in questions about your past. They're going to try to use questions about what you've done in the past to predict how you're going to behave in the future, and whether you can demonstrate not only those technical skills, but whether you can demonstrate those transferable skills and the company values. So when you're describing past actions, you want to think about what your values and mindset were at the time. Often your mindset is going to reflect your values. Things like you're a team player, or that you value scientific communication because you value the accessibility of that content to a wide audience. And then the transferable skills, that'd be things like conflict management, the public speaking, things like that. But both are important, and you want to look at what the company is looking for, how they describe their employees, how they describe their team, and work these into your answers about past experiences. You don't need to close on the outcome that's really metric like before. It can close on what lessons you learned from the experience. I think this will be more clear if I provide an example. So here's one. My team was asked to take on a project that would have required them to work overtime. Because I value my team's work-life balance, I communicated to our manager that we would like to collaborate with another team to get the work done on time, but without requiring the overtime. I already know quite a bit about your mindset or values and about your transferable skills. I know that you're a team player who values work-life balance and values a healthy team. I know some transferable skills. I know that you're willing to communicate when there's a problem with work that you feel like can be remedied, that you're independently able to come up with solutions, and that you are collaborative. It can close on a negative outcome potentially. So this was ultimately rejected, but I spoke to each of my team members afterwards as I learned the value of recognizing and thanking people for their work. That tells me a lot about your values as a team player. It tells me a lot about how you look after your team, and it tells me a lot about the kind of teammate that you would be. You're also going to be asked questions not just about the past, but about what your future actions might be. These kind of predict the future behavioral questions are used to assess soft skills. So they'll provide hypothetical situations and ask you how you would go about solving them. Looking at the job description, you want to look at what are the soft skills or transferable skills that they're placing the greatest emphasis on, and get comfortable utilizing those as your toolkit to answer these hypothetical questions. How can you recognize these questions? They'll look a little bit like these examples. How would you troubleshoot an assay? Tell me about it. Tell me how you would handle a disagreement with a coworker. What if you made a mistake at work and no one knew or caught on? Let's go with the first example. How would you troubleshoot an assay? There's a lot of ways you could answer this question, but think about how they describe their team and how their team works. If they're looking for someone who is independently driven and who is aware of time and has good time management, your first answer to this shouldn't really be, well, I would go ask another teammate what they would do, because that doesn't display independence, that doesn't show a speedy movement towards trying to solve the problem. Instead, you might say something like, I would design and run several parallel assays, changing something for each one to find out quickly what the problem might be and fix it. That does reflect that independence, that does reflect that time sensitivity. Alternatively, if they say we're a highly collaborative team and we really value communication and working together on solving problems, then it's the opposite. Maybe you would suggest collaborating with another team member to try to solve this assay issue. After you've practiced some answers to these questions and you've gotten comfortable verbalizing the answers, and you've researched the company, you've researched your past experience, again, a minimum of an hour for each. It's time to put it all into action. So what do you do the day of? The first one is you really want to dress for success. The STEM industry is a business at the end of the day, and so you want to dress in business wear for the interview. A majority of hiring managers have told us that they have passed on candidates in the past who did have the right skills for a role, but because they did not show up to the interview appropriately dressed. And so they felt they didn't really care about this job opportunity that much. But also, if it's a virtual interview, your background counts as your dress. So you want to choose an uncluttered background, and if you can, you want a quiet background. The uncluttered, quiet background is going to help them focus on your answers and really feel like they're having a conversation with you and getting to know you and how you would fit into the role. You also want good lighting. You want them to be able to see you. It's hard to feel like you've had a good conversation with someone if you can't really get a good view of them during the video call. So you want to have good lighting, try to have it quiet with minimal distractions, visually and audio. As I mentioned, they're looking for that mutual interest. They're looking for evidence that you care about this role. All of us are not naturally super enthusiastic people. I know I'm not. And so it would be hard to me to appear very perky and happy in an interview setting. But there are other ways to show them that you care and show that you're an engaged applicant. One is arriving on time. The other is the engagement part, which is going to come by showing that you have done the research in the company, that you're able to talk to them about what interests you in the role and how you would see yourself fitting in with the company. That proof that you've not only researched the company, but you've thought about how you might be able to help the company is going to show them you care about the role and is going to make a good impression on them. But also actively listen to them during the interview. It's not just about reciting the answers to questions that you've practiced. you also want to listen to what they're sharing about the company. Maybe they're potentially starting a new project soon. Maybe they're expanding the company in a new direction. Things that they're sharing that are not on the job description can be really powerful if you can listen to them, take that information in, and then provide an example of why you would be very invested and interested in that new development, or an example of your experience that maybe wasn't on your resume because you weren't aware that this would be something that might occur in the next year or so for the company. But it actually happens that you do have an experience or a skill that would be useful for that new discovery that you've made about them. Being able to take that in and respond by adding on to what you've just learned is a good way to show that you are listening to them, not just expecting them to listen to you. And then lastly, even though it's not done as much anymore, they really appreciate it if you send them a thank you and send each individual interviewer a thank you afterwards for their, not only their time, but for sharing with you a little bit about the company that they work for and the company that they're passionate about. The only exception to this is if you've gone through a recruiter, or sometimes government roles will say not to send a thank you. Now, some recruiters will not have this policy. And for those, you do want to send a thank you to the people you interviewed with. If they don't tell you explicitly not to, assume that it's an expectation that you do send a thank you. You can do it after the interview, 24 hours maybe. Usually if it's an afternoon interview, wait till the next day. If it's a morning interview, you can send it in the afternoon of the same day, just with a small delay. Include some details of what the interviewers shared about the company, about what they do, something that makes it a little bit more personal. Again, that comes back to the active listening part of the interview. And you don't want to mention the job offer during this. You don't want to potentially make it seem like you're sending the thank you in the hopes that you'll get an offer, even though that kind of is the case. You want to keep the thank you focused just on gratitude for them taking the time to talk to you, gratitude for them sharing a little bit about the company, rather than gratitude for the potential of an offer. But if you don't hear from them in, say, a few weeks about whether they're passing and going with another applicant, or whether there's next steps to move to, then that's when you can contact them about your application status. But keep the thank you note just focused on a thank you. So I know that there's a lot to cover for interviews, and that's just scratching the surface. So I hope we're able to take some questions during the Q&A period, which is going to be helpful. And I'm going to have Beth drop my email in the chat. You're always welcome to reach out with questions that occur to you afterwards. If you have particular issues you've been running into with interviews and you would like our opinion, I'm happy to provide that. In the spirit of saying thank you, I want to say thank you for attending. This is the last part of this series, but we're going to have more events announced soon. If you're interested in that, you can either go on Eventbrite or LinkedIn. We should be posting about those soon. And we're always welcome feedback for the events. This is the first time that we've done a 4-part series that are all connected rather than individual events. So if you have feedback, positive, constructive, encourage you to either email me, or we'll be sending out an anonymous link in the thank you email for this event. And you can reply there as well. It's not mandatory, but if you'd have something you'd like to share, I'd be happy to hear it. So with that, I would like to reiterate thank you for attending and open it to Q&A.